Good morning. My name is Francisco Grajales Cravioto. I work at the Vattenfall. I'm manager for global emissions at the emissions desk of the trading department. And I would like to talk to you about corporate carbon management strategies. And because one of the main questions companies have once they get legislation to cap their emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, is how do I comply with the regulation in the most cost-efficient way? In order to do this, the most important is to have a carbon management strategy, but there is no real methodology to implement it or to develop the strategies. So normally, the way it has been historically is that just companies empirically come up with a strategy, and normally it's a bottom-up approach. But I think with the experience from the companies in the EU ETS, such as Vattenfall, we can find some, let's say, common aspects of a carbon management strategy. Such common aspects, I will summarize them in few points. The first one is in order to develop a strategy, you first need to know what's your carbon exposure, meaning how does a price on carbon or the legislation on limiting greenhouse gas emissions will affect your bottom line, will affect your operations. In order to do this, of course, you will have first to measure the emissions that you have as a company, but also estimate or quantify the economic exposure of those emissions. This is very important because we have found with other companies that management sometimes is not interested or not paying enough attention to carbon management. And the reason is because most of the times the calculations or the carbon exposure calculations are not well done and are not presented correctly to the board or to the management. Once you have done that, of course, not all companies are exposed to carbon the same way. So it might just be that your company has really little exposure, and therefore maybe a very simple carbon management strategy which can be drawn at very, let's say, lower levels of management is enough. But for larger companies, multinationals, normally you need some more comprehensive carbon management strategy. And for that, you would need to first define roles, very important to avoid infighting. You don't want people to do, you don't want duplication of responsibilities, and you don't want infighting to see who manages or makes decisions related to carbon. And these will obviously avoid the cost, to increased costs of compliance. Another important aspect of your carbon management strategy, how you're affected by carbon policies, is to define the tools or the actions that you need to implement to address that exposure. And those are, for example, just purchasing allowances or getting them from the government and surrender them for compliance. You could also maybe look for opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in-house in your own operations, and maybe that's enough. Of course, you can be engaged in more sophisticated trading and buying and purchasing of allowances. Also to be involved with developing offset projects in case it's allowed by your carbon policies. But in most cases, or in the case of larger conglomerates, I would say you will have to implement several of these options together. But that's at the end, it's going to be defined based on the exposure you have. Third, another third aspect that when defining a carbon management strategy is the definition and assignment of roles and responsibilities throughout the company in order to make decisions surrounding carbon. This is very important to avoid duplicity of responsibilities and also to reduce costs. You don't want several departments doing the same thing, because also it means that your your management of the compliance position might be very inefficient. Finally, once you've implemented your strategy, it's very important to monitor and to follow up on the results and to adjust the strategy as you go. Of course, there is no one size fits all. Every company has different situations and different needs and objectives, but it's very important that you follow up and define ways to monitor your strategy. One thing I would like to just comment finally is that a strategy of just waiting for the last day to comply and to close your position is not considered a strategy. So I encourage the people in charge of this topic to really think about it and present a plan to their management so they can address this issue in the best way possible. If you want more information about different examples of corporate carbon strategies, you can go to the chapter in the workbook related to this topic.